Hi, I'm Vanessa, and I love bad Star Trek. I break down the bad episodes of my favorite shows so you don't have to watch it. I will be the broken lava lamp that is Star Trek Picard. So spoilers, spoiler warning, my entire channel is spoilers, so if you're planning on watching this at some point, do not watch this first. Today, I will be talking to you about an episode called Assimilation. Star Trek Picard is a show that I have not discussed before because I enjoyed season 1 so much. The premise of it was, of course, that after Romulus' sun went supernova and Picard being denied the resources for that rescue mission by Starfleet because of a concurrent synth attack on Mars orchestrated by a faction of Romulans, Picard then submitted his resignation from Starfleet. He could no longer be a part of an organization that was unwilling to rescue folks because of racism and bias. I loved the premise of Picard no longer being a respected pillar of the Federation on principle. I was excited by the idea of a flawed and corrupt Starfleet. The discussions of Romulan culture were really interesting because they've been famously isolationist since the original series Balance of Terror. So learning about them was cool. I was happy we were finally getting a spin-off of Star Trek post-Voyager. The pervasive bias against the Borg by Picard and Romulans and synthetic life by others was played out in ways that made for classic Trek for me. And the way that characters old and new were introduced was lovely and didn't feel heavy-handed. The show even redid Data's death, which honestly I was entirely on board with because I am not a fan of the TNG movies. So the season ended with Picard becoming a synth himself. So he's sort of a robot now because his real body died of an incurable illness. And he and his ragtag crew of ex-Starfleet managed to save the universe from some bad Romulans. So with all that said, the start of season 2 was a tonal jolt. The issues the Federation and Starfleet had with synths, Romulans, and Picard seemed to be water under the bridge. Picard and his crew were reinstated in Starfleet. Rios, who left Starfleet before because of mental illness, had another ship and was captain again. Elnor is the first Romulan in Starfleet. Raffi, who was shown to be struggling with addiction, also got her commission back. Everyone's life was just fine. Starfleet, fine. Everything felt strangely neat and tidy and happily resolved when Starfleet and the Federation had proven that it was prone to corruption and making choices out of fear. So the start of season 2 felt very much like how Discovery starts their seasons, where most of the stuff from last season is just put completely to bed and never talked about again. And that was signal 1 that season 2 was not going to be for me, because I hate when serialized shows hit the reset button. Why even do it then? Like, why even bother? But the first 2 episodes were all right. The first checked in with the characters, and Picard is called on to greet the Borg because they want to be part of the Federation. The Borg as a force for good is a wonderful break from tradition. And the second was the cast being tossed asunder into another time by Q as penance, and this different reality was very reminiscent of the Terran Empire, colloquially known as the Mirrorverse, but this wasn't a different dimension this time. Q had altered the Prime timeline to play out where Earth was under fascist rule, whose prerogative it was to completely wipe out every other alien race. So 7 of 9 woke up without the Borg implants because the Borg had been annihilated, and discovers that she is actually the leader of the so-called Confederation. And in the biggest gag of the episode, Picard is now a tyrannical, slave-owning, murderous general whose parlor is adorned with the skulls of his enemies, who included people like Klingon General Martok, a beloved character from Deep Space Nine, and Sarek, a close friend of Picard and Spock. Spock's dad, who was murdered by this version of Picard in front of Spock himself. Both of these people were folks that Picard held in extremely high regard, so he was beside himself. The episode ended with Picard attempting to kidnap the Borg Queen as she's about to be publicly executed as a way to time travel to where Earth took this turn. A lot of folks thought that episode was really silly because it felt very getting the band back together, which is sort of understandable after an episode where they check in with the characters. But I thought it was kind of fun to twist things in this way, and an unhinged Q felt like an auspicious beginning. So it was clear we had 2 stories to tell here. 3 maybe. The building of trust that would be necessary to consider the Borg a reliable ally and Federation member, and finding out what's wrong with Q. But episode 3 was where the season started to swerve off the road. Even the music choices feel wrong. It starts with the Borg Queen sending them back in time to the 21st century, crash landing on Picard's vineyard, and the sudden death of Elnor, the Romulan that I mentioned before. Elnor was shot as they were escaping the fascist version of Earth, which of course rattles Raffi, who grew closest to him. What that did was button up another vestige of season 1, and sadly, this pushes Raffi into being one thing for the rest of the episode, which is forceful, distraught, and distracted. She doesn't quite say it out loud, but she does blame Picard for his death, citing Picard's games with Q, which of course is unfair because Q just fucks around with Picard at his discretion. He just does it when he feels like it.
For decades, you've played games with whatever Q is.
And spoiler alert on a pile of spoilers here, Elnor comes back. So there's all this heavy grief and anger whose purpose completely evaporates by the end. Elnor's the Romulan in the refrigerator for season 2, and I don't like that. It's not as silly as Search for Spock, but it does trivialize that loss. Then the other thing Dr. Jurati warns Rios about with such graceless foreshadowing quickly becomes a non-issue.
Because we're 400 years in the past, you have to look out for butterflies. If you lose that, Q won't be the only one breaking the timeline. Don't draw attention to yourself. No hospitals, no authorities, no security checkpoints.
She's citing the butterfly effect, which alludes to another directive by Starfleet, which as a Starfleet captain, Rios knows backward and forward, which is the temporal prime directive. Hi, I'm editing Vanessa, and I also love bad Star Trek, and I just wanted to pop in here for a second to explain what the hell the temporal prime directive is. So it is essentially the time travel analog to the Starfleet Prime Directive. And what it outlines and codifies is telling people not to go back in time and mess with the timeline. This isn't just me making things up or reading into stuff. This is mentioned in TNG, it is mentioned in Voyager and Enterprise, and the first time Trek shows what happens when you go back in time and mess with things that you're not supposed to is in City on the Edge of Forever, when McCoy saves somebody from getting hit by a car, and in doing so he completely eradicates the existence of the Federation and Starfleet. So that is what that is. The crew is there to stop Earth from becoming a fascist hellscape, and other stuff is supposed to be hands off. No crushing butterflies, no using a phaser. And Rios says he understands Jurati's warning because he understands the repercussions of altering things now as it may echo into the future, but he doesn't. He shits on it like Johnny Depp's bed. I am shocked that he actually ever graduated from Starfleet, but that's not as weird as their plan to have Rios, Seven, and Raffi look for the Watcher, some entity mentioned by the Borg Queen that's supposed to help them figure out how to fix time. But they don't know where they are, except they're somewhere in LA, and it might be an alien who might have anachronistic tech.
If the Watcher is our only lead, then it's probably some alien species that doesn't belong here.
If you're not familiar with this city, it is truly enormous. That is not nearly specific enough. So Picard and Jurati are gonna stay behind to boot up the Borg Queen and get some more answers. Like, wouldn't it make more sense to just get the Borg Queen up, shit showered and shaved, and get their answers first before having their crew just on a wild goose chase? Having 3 of your crew inconspicuously search for a watcher in a huge city with no clues sounds like a massive waste of time, and it is.
Well, I'm going with it brings him back. And I'm not waiting around for that thing.
Raffi suggests that they beam themselves to the highest point in LA where their scanners would work best, based on a series of assumptions pulled out of her butt. And Jurati even said, you can't take tech that would confuse people of this time, so I'm not sure why phasers are bad, but tricorders are fine. But they don't even beam to that point because the transporters are on the blink, so Raffi ends up in some random alley, and Seven beams to some random playground, and Rios takes a tumble from a fire escape to a weirdly beach cabana version of California Dreaming.
All the leaves are brown.
The tone of the song makes no sense in this context. Like, maybe it's meant to break up the seriousness of what they're embarking on. But Elnor just died. They're on a mission to not have fascism overtake Earth. Not really a time for a sipping on a margarita on Venice Beach vibe. So Rios is dragged to a local clinic. So he breaks the first rule by going to a hospital, but it's not quite his fault because he fell down and someone just dragged him into a clinic. He is banged up pretty bad. But this sets off another plot, which is a massive waste of time as well. Starting with his comm badge being dropped and some kid picking it up, and you think Rios would be more careful with it, but keep in mind that temporal prime directive is something Rios has been itching to break, it seems. He truly does not give a shit. I can't overemphasize that. He tells the doctor his real name.
What's your name? I'm Teresa.
Cristóbal.
He talks about how he got the highest score in a flight simulator.
My mother, she worked at an academy that trained pilots. They had this amazing simulator there, so one day I sneak out. I thought I broke this damn thing.
And finally discovers that he's missing his comm badge, which it's some kid is playing with, who turns out to be the doctor's kid, and he's again kept away from the comm badge for no fucking reason.
Oh, come on.
Buenos quipos.
Didn't your parents ever teach you that stealing is bad?
You could give me something.
What?
For the badge. You gotta give me something, or else you're just stealing.
So he's flirting with this doctor and making nice with the kid. We see where this is going, right? Just fuck the temporal prime directive right in the face. The reason that they're keeping the comm badge away from him, plot-wise, is so that Seven and Raffi can't find him. That's the only reason that's happening. And it gets no better when he's detained by ICE. Another exit ramp the show takes where it touches on an already fascist practice of ICE wantonly abducting folks darker than khaki to have them go to one of over 200 detention centers across the country, separating kids from their families and having them adopted by white families, which according to the UN is a form of genocide. But that's not touched on, of course. It's just something to tie up Rios for a while because he speaks Spanish and he has no ID. So other than the scenes with Jurati being partially assimilated so she could steal the Watcher's coordinates and the emotionally tense moments of the Borg Queen noticing how Jurati feels during that merge, this episode is skippable AF, and I'm sorry, it gets no better from here. Like, subscribe, no pressure, but peer pressure. Till next time, I guess.